Thank you, Isabel, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to everybody, especially those that are connecting from WorldFish. I think this is a historic moment where we have our first joint seminar between CIMMYT and WorldFish. CIMMYT is in a process of designing, under the mandate of the board, our Excellence in Science strategy, one of our 6 sub-strategies. And in that Excellence in Science strategy, which operates under or integrated or shows how it contributes to the 1CJR research and myself, we challenged each other. We said, can we find actually somewhere where CIMMYT and WorldFish can work together? And some that were hearing that conversation were actually laughing and saying there's probably other centers that it's easier for each of you to find collaboration. But here we are. We found a space where we can work together. And I think that is what today is about, challenging our ideas, thinking strategically and seeking that space where all of you have a mandate to work together. I do want to congratulate my colleague DG as a fantastic partner to have strategic discussions, tactical discussions, and also science discussions. So that's how I want to publicly thank you for the great relationship we have built as 2 of the, I can say, COVID DGs in the system. So thanks for that. And of course, I want to congratulate the fantastic scientists we will have today. With Ahmed, we get more than 30 years of experience in Egypt and Africa working on aquaculture. With Sarah, we of course get a wealth of knowledge in fish agroecosystems and how to, at community level, empower equity in fishery and agriculture. So I think this connects very well with Alison's talk about how we are going to respond transformationally to the looming food crisis. So once again, thanks for coming here and together with us thinking out of the box. Over to you, Assam.
Thank you very much, Bram. Thank you very much indeed for your kind words as well, Bram. Sorry, I'll keep my camera off, partly because I'm down with COVID. Speaking of the COVID DGs.
Sorry to hear that. That's completely fulfilling the COVID DG mandate.
Exactly. So thank you very much indeed, Bram and colleagues, for this indeed a very historic moment, really, to be honest with that. I mean, being able to work together and taking an action beyond just the expression of the willingness of let's do something together to take action. And hopefully this will be quite a milestone for us that gives us that sort of the force of inertia to move this very exciting collaboration opportunity between CIMMYT and WorldFish together. And I remember the inspiration came to me when I visited colleagues in Egypt. And when I saw that small experiment that was going on about combining tilapia production, which is fish, with wheat, depending on the season. During the cold season, trying to grow wheat, and during the warm season, trying to grow fish. So essentially, the fascinating idea here is being able to produce both protein and carbohydrate from the same plot of land. And my immediate reaction was, have we approached colleagues from CIMMYT? If we haven't, then we must, because CIMMYT has this wealth of expertise from decades, and I think bringing those expertise from be it wheat or maize and fish together, I think we're talking about something really, really big, and particularly under the advent of climate change as well, where we need to diversify means of livelihoods, is going to be really critical. And this has proven to be, effective in areas that we're going to be discussed today, particularly by my colleague. Sorry, this also asks you to start your video. I know, I've apologized for that already. So this is going to be brought by Sarah Freed, one of our stellar scientists with our WorldFish colleagues as well, who's going to bring some examples from rice fish systems, particularly in Cambodia, in Myanmar, and all the opportunities, the challenges, and benefits that come with it under changing climate, and beyond the production of food, as well as in rehabilitation of degraded landscapes, etc. as well. So there's so many opportunities. So therefore, colleagues, I'm just here to express my huge excitement, and particularly working with colleagues from CIMMYT and with your visionary leader, Bram, who's been sort of a rock for myself since I assumed this role. So really looking forward to learning more from colleagues, from the experts today, but also this is only the beginning of the growing partnership between CIMMYT and WorldFish. So thank you very much, Bram and colleagues.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and get well soon. Over to you, Isabel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this welcoming message. So I would like to introduce our first distinguished speaker, who will present a seminar, Integrated Agriculture and Aquaculture Systems for Food Security, Ahmed Nasr-Allah, Country Director at Egypt from WorldFish. Ahmed Nasr-Allah has worked in aquaculture development in Egypt and Africa for over 30 years. Ahmed started working with WorldFish in 2004. He has extensive knowledge in production systems and became aquaculture economist by training. Ahmed currently is the country director of WorldFish Egypt. He's leading the development of climate-smart aquaculture, technologies, and integrated aquaculture systems. And Ahmed is leading a number of projects aimed at boosting aquaculture development in several African countries such as Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Nigeria. He earned a Master of Science degree in aquaculture. So Ahmed Nasr-Allah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Do you see my screen?
Yes, maybe you can just have it in full presentation.
Should be now in full presentation.
Okay. Yes.
Now it's working?
Yes, now it is working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim and Dr. Assam, Isabel, and our colleagues for giving us this opportunity to talk about our experience in integrated aquaculture system in Egypt and Middle East and Africa. As you all know, screen is not shifting.
Otherwise, we can come back to the other PowerPoint and that would be okay.
Yeah.
Or if you prefer, I can share the screen.
Yeah, please, if possible.
Okay.
Okay, next slide, please.
Okay, just 1 second.
The driver for integrated aquaculture is scarcity of water in the Middle East. As you all know, Middle East is one of the regions where it have scarcity of water, and optimizing water use efficiency is critical for food security and job creations. In the same time, this enables us to produce animal protein food in area away from traditional fish farming area and fisheries area. Finally, it helps us to protect the environment and through optimizing use of resources. Following slide, please. Under FAO, they have publication number 407, classified integrated agriculture, aquaculture into 4 categories. One of them, the first is integrated farming system, the second integrated animal fish system, third fish rice system, and fourth fish feeding and management. We're going through some part of this. We'll leave rice fish system to my colleague Sarah because they have a very good success in Southeast Asia. So we'll leave this for her to discuss. And we're going to focus on our experience in Middle East and Africa. Next slide. The driver for water change by 2050, population of the world will reach more than 9 billion. That means we are in need, serious need for food. And to produce more food with limiting water resource, this is an issue. So we have to optimize the efficiency of water resource we use. For instance, in Africa population at the moment between 700 to 800 million. It's going to be 2.5 billion by 2050. So there is a massive need for increasing food production by 2050. Next slide, please. On the other hand, climate expert indicated that by 2050, Africa will face challenge of water availability. If we look into the map, we'll find most of Africa will be under scarcity of water, except some parts in south and few countries in west. And all the Africa will under water scarcity and water stress. This is a very strong driver to optimize water use efficiency. Also, this will extend to South Asia and west of Asia and some parts of South Asia. Next slide, please. If we look into our case in Egypt, population is growing every year by 2.5%. In the same time, there is GDP, and the agriculture is using 85% of available water resource. So with increasing population, will be more demand on water to produce more agricultural crop. That means there is more stress in water available for fish farming. On the other hand, there is increased water availability will be less due to climate change, due to pollution, due to upstream intervention. So this is a very good, strong driver for us in Egypt to go into efficient water production system. Next slide, please. Next, please.
I'm sorry, not moving.
Okay, integration in old land. In Egypt, most of our agriculture is concentrated in delta land, where it is called old land of Egypt, and usually it's designated for agricultural crop. What we are doing in our research here in old land or aquaculture area, we use the land twice through rotation. So integration here through rotation of use of the land in fish and in weed. In winter time, temperature goes down. Fish are not, especially tilapia, didn't grow in winter time. So using the land pond area for growing fish at this time, wheat at this time, give advantage of using the good weather for growing wheat. In the same time, we use the land. This land is rich with fertilizers from previous fish crop. If we look to the photos in upper left hand, this is the bottom after harvest. It is rich with carbon and phosphorus, and nitrogen and phosphorus. And this carbon and nitrogen, if it's not utilized properly, it will be source of climate issue because CO2 emissions. So growing wheat in these ponds utilize some research work, but unfortunately most of this is not published yet. And the study concluded that stocking fish in ponds after wheat giving better yield than stocking fish in ponds without wheat. Especially, wheat may improve the soil characteristics, take out organic matter from previous seasons, and the remains of wheat break down in ponds and make zooplankton growth, better environment for fish. For this reason, growth of fish in ponds after wheat is higher, as we see in column 2, almost 800 or 700 kg higher. This was in ponds with low input system. Next slide. Another form of integration, but will not focus a lot now, is animal production system. And this is well established in Southeast Asia and in some parts of Africa. But this is our experience. In the left bottom, we allow cow to get into fish ponds after cutting wheat to clean the grass. At the same time, this gives manure to the pond for following crop. Next slide, please. Indoor integration, which is mostly called aquaponic, where we use water twice, first for growing fish, and then take the water with nutrients to produce horticulture or vegetables crop. This business became growing daily, because it simply can be a very good step forward to organic crop production, and it helps to produce food in remote area, and it helps actually in COVID crisis. This helps to produce food in remote area and distance. Next slide, please. Outdoor integration. Next slide. Outdoor integration. This is based on that every kg of feed we give to fish produce ammonia and produce phosphorus. So utilization of this ammonia and phosphorus in water effluent, this minimize fertilizer use for crop production and minimize impact of aquaculture in surrounding environment. Next slide, please. Water could be groundwater, could be surface water, and could be mixed between ground and surface water. Next slide. In simplified ways, we use groundwater or surface canal waters we store the water in reservoir, and we grow fish in this reservoir before water go into to irrigate crops. In some cases, water could be used twice to produce more than crop of fish before going to plant fertilization. Next slide. We have experience, we have done some publication or some work here in Abasa, and we used fish water coming out from fish pond to irrigate crop. And this crop were wheat in winter, and it is maize in summertime. Maize produce with 50% fertilization rate plus to pond water produce the same yield as maize giving 100% fertilization rate. In the same time, quality of product is different. So fertilization using fish tanks could save up to 50% of fertilization requirement for crop. Next slide. Next, please. The coming photo showing integrated agriculture, aquaculture in some old lands in Upper Egypt, where the farmer is growing sugarcane, and he used part of his farm to grow fish and take the water from fish tank to irrigate sugarcane, and he achieved, following slide, he achieved a very good success from this approach, and it's expanding in some parts of our Egypt. Following slide, following one. Integration in desert area where the water, most of the cases come from ground water, and groundwater, pumping groundwater is expensive, so maximum use of this water is quite important for economics of production in the farm. The picture we have showing these two types of integration, and the farm in the left producing organic crop and have a great business to export the product, fruit and vegetables to Europe supermarket, big supermarket chain in Europe as organic product. Following slide. Next, please. In Upper Egypt, there is a project to reclaim lands in a small area, 5 faddan, which is about 2 hectares per farmer. In the following slides, yeah, exactly. 2 hectares per farmer, and the photos here showing that farmers practice integrated approach, where he used about 400 meters or less from his pond area or his farm area to irrigate, to store water and produce fish, enable him to produce higher yield from his crop with less fertilizer. Following year, farmers next to him adopted the same approach. The photo below in the left showing other farmers adopted the same approach to achieve integrated agriculture to get better yield. Following slide, please. Here we see in the left mango trees irrigated with water coming from fish tanks, growing very well, much better. These are 5 years old mango. Growth is much better and achieving higher yield with less fertilization. And mango is all year round paper plant. Following slide, please. In 2010, we have conducted a study to assess the integrated agriculture, aquaculture in 4 commercial farms in Egypt. And we find the crop is mango in the 3 farms, alfalfa, orange, vegetables, some farms growing wheat and maize in different farms, but this was the study where we conducted to see the integration, and this was field study, not a systematic one. We need to go for systematic one when we have opportunity. Next slide, please. The study indicated that water coming from fish tank, if we look to the row below, the red color, which quantify quantities of nutrient from different farms, we will see that for instance, farm 1 produce almost 2 kilograms of nitrogen per day. So this is the output. This is we talk here about nitrogen itself as a unit, not as a fertilizer. Farmers using this for irrigating crops, and input of fertilizers from our system is organic compared to chemical for one. This next slide. Next slide. Integrated agriculture, aquaculture is ways to improving farmer income. As in every step, we have opportunity to generate income. With the first tank system, we could sell the tilapia to make revenue. Or from the following tank system, the water moves from tilapia to catfish. Also, catfish will generate revenue. Selling water move from catfish to irrigate crop using drip irrigation system, and to fertilize to take the manure from or waste of fish from the system, and we sell crop. The crop or forage product, crop also is used for animal growing, producing milk and need. So in every part of the chain, there is income. Waste of animal is used to produce biogas. So it's fully integrated system, which is environmental friendly. Next slide, please. This slide showing that we make assessment for one of the small farmers. This is a simple farm, just 2-hectare farm, where you have only one pond to produce, one tank to produce fish. And this reservoir already established to balance water when the water is not available, and economic partial budget analysis indicating that he make revenue from his system. Next slide, please. We have done or published one of our work in Abasa under practice, title Practice and Resource Use Efficiency of Egyptian Farm Applying Aquaculture-Agriculture Integration in WAS 2018. And this is analyzed the nutrient in the paper. We went through nutrients in water, inlet water to the fish tank, and the nutrients in outlet water out from fish tanks. And from there, we can quantify nutrients release. Following slide. With this, we can say in conclusion, integrated agriculture, aquaculture enable maximum water use efficiency and contributing for food security and increasing farm income. Research and development area, what we need to take forward in future is we need to study nutrient flow from fish system to crop system and to understand or relate this to nutrient requirements for crop. Second, to standardize water exchange rate in fish tank system and link this to water requirement for crop irrigation. Third, efficiency of water filtration system is quite important to avoid clogging of drip irrigation system. Third, we need to improve knowledge of users of best management practices of integrated agriculture aquaculture system. With this, thank you very much for your patience, and we're looking forward to meet you on discussion. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Doctor, for this interesting presentation. Now, I would like to invite our next speaker from WorldFish as well, and she's going to present about this seminar, Designing Integrated Production Practices to Meet Diverse Objectives, Biophysical and Sociocultural Insights from Rice Fish Innovations. Sarah Fried, scientist from WorldFish. Sarah Fried is a scientist from with WorldFish. Her research focuses on fish and agroecosystems in agroecosystems, community empowerment and equity in fisheries and agriculture, and the transformation of food systems to support biodiversity, nutrition, and climate and environmental change adaptation. She holds a Ph.D. in environmental science and management and cares deeply about strengthening wise resource use and well-being, especially within rural communities. Sarah, the floor is yours. Oh. Okay, so I think there is an inconvenience. So maybe we can then have 5 minutes for questions and answers, and then we can continue with the following presentation while Sarah connects. So if you would like to have a question, here we have a comment and question in the chat box for Dr. To be addressed to Dr. Ahmed. So let it. Okay.
So, yes.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dr. Gidon.
Yes.
Groundwater is limited resource, and we are taking care. We should take care of all water drop, because drop of water means life. So we should take care of this, and this integration approach should be adopted with consideration of water efficiency. In the same time, integration could be used very well in surface water, either direct integration in multiple use of water or through rotation we don't have a big serious with surface water and contamination. This is not issue, especially with water treatment of surface water. It simply can make simple water treatment for surface water to use it, and we have done analyzing safety standard of product of fish, and we have no issue of product quality for consumer from surface water. In the same time, when we use groundwater for integrated system, we take care of water availability and water resources. Hope this covers your vote.
Thank you very much. Okay, here we have another comment from Ahmed Nasr-Allah. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed Nasr-Allah, for this excellent presentation and all information which maximize the water use and got add value from the farm. And Gideon is thanking for the clarification. So if there is, we can continue with another comment or question that you would like to address to Dr. Ahmed Nasr-Allah.
Okay. Through the rotation of wheat and fish, we achieved in our system about 5 to 6 tons of wheat from fish ponds per hectare in winter crop. So if we calculated both fish and wheat production, this contributes significantly for food security through rotation wheat and fish. This needs still, I need a lot of research to understand nutrient cycles in fish ponds after wheat, and nutrient cycles in wheat crop after fish crop. So there is an opportunity for us, CIMMYT and WorldFish, to understand this point and produce leaflet about best practice to achieve efficient use of resources to contribute to food security. Thank you.
Thank you. If another question, another comment, you can raise your hand as well. Okay. Yes, please. Sam, you can open your microphone.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I couldn't hold back. I was really excited to see Ahmed's excellent presentation. I think particularly the viability of particularly the fish wheat systems and the benefits that come with it. But I just also want to emphasize, even though this is primarily examples from Egypt, or what we call the upper land of Egypt, Upper Egypt. So this is equally important, the entire Nile Basin. When we talk about Nile Basin, we're talking about Ethiopia, Eritrea, Uganda, Sudan, Egypt, just highly populated countries with somehow similar climatic conditions, but also huge reliance, disproportionately high reliance on wheat compared to the rest of Africa, I would say. So therefore, I think offering on the plate fish and wheat beyond Egypt, but looking at the entire Nile Basin, offers a huge opportunity. That's all I want to say, but also want to congratulate Ahmed for that excellent presentation as well.
Thank you, Sam. Also, okay. Also, I have another question for Dr. Ahmed. What specific geographies you would suggest for integrated wheat, maize, fish farming systems? And it is related. Where does maize and wheat fits in fish value chain?
Okay, let's start with the first section of the question, which is geographical. This works very well with Africa, North Africa, East Africa, and even some parts of the domain of Africa. Also works very well with Siwana region, where CG is working initiative, CG initiative Siwana region. So this is fit very, very well with Siwana region initiative and regions. Maize and wheat fit in fish value chain. I'm not sure what this can say, but we have conducted study here in our basin to have integrated fish crop and duck. And we used maize and wheat product crop to feed duck and to sell to people consumption. So we make a comprehensive integration system. We produce fish, we produce duck, we produce wheat and maize from our research here in Abbas. All this respond to your note.
Thank you very much. So let's see if we have more questions or comments. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to continue with our following speaker. So I am very glad. It is my pleasure to introduce Alison Bentley, Director of the Global Wheat Program from the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, with the seminar Shocking-Proofing Wheat to Build Future Resilience. Alison Bentley is the director of the CIMMYT Global Wheat Program based in Mexico. Her research combines genetics and genomics to develop and deliver new tools and technology to improve plant breeding, crop production, and adaptation to climate change. At CIMMYT, Alison leads a team of scientists using scientific approaches to develop improved wheat germplasm. This germplasm captures of trace productivity, resilience, smallholder livelihoods. Prior to joining CIMMYT in November 2020, Alison worked in the UK focused on translation of fundamental scientific breakthroughs into tangible impacts for the agri-food sector. She has a doctorate in agriculture science and a PhD in agriculture from the University of Sydney, Australia. Alison, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Isabel. So now more than ever, we need to build greater resilience across our global food system. And today I want to highlight some of the key elements of CIMMYT's response to the wheat crisis arising due to the Ukraine-Russia war, as well as to growing global climate threats. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to present alongside WorldFish colleagues today. I think if we go back to the book of Matthew in the New Testament, around 85 AD, we can read about the foundational power of both loaves and fishes. I think for myself personally, I also had my first experience of working in agricultural development in the early 2000s, working in the Mekong Delta of Vietnam on the integration and optimization of rice, fish, and high-value cash crop production systems. So great to be able to revisit the link between aquatic and cropping systems. So we know that wheat supply alleviates global hunger, and this map here shows the ranking of daily kilocalories from different crops and shows the relative importance of wheat. And from this, we can see it highlighted in red the importance of wheat as a source of energy to global populations, spread really widely throughout the world. And we've recently argued that although focusing on alternative sources of nutrition and also alternative sources of food is really important, that these foundational power of our staple crops are essential for really underpinning global food security at scale. I think also in the context of this seminar and talking about different sources of protein, it's also important to recognize the role of wheat as a significant source of plant-based protein. And again, this map shows in which countries wheat is the #1 daily protein per capita source in terms of plant-based protein into human diets. So really important for the context of this presentation and the context of the current crisis and our response is the foundational role of wheat in providing both calories and protein to a very significant proportion of the world's population. So in my presentation today, I'm going to touch just on 2 elements of our recent work. And the first is responding to a crisis to really show our response agenda in terms of addressing the current supply issues and price issues, mostly focused around wheat. And then looking to the future, how we build resilient production and really deal with many of the overlapping and confounding effects of climate change. And so first, responding to a crisis, very much in the news at the moment is the effects of the Ukraine-Russia war, particularly on global wheat supply chains. And we've seen a concentration of import supply over recent years, and this has catalyzed a price spike and also limited availability, particularly in regions of the world where the hungriest people live, sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. And I've got some links here to some of our recent work highlighting the threats of this current crisis in terms of wheat availability for populations, particularly in the global south. So why wheat? Why is wheat at the center of this current crisis? It's really stems from the reliance on concentrated and cheap imports, which have been readily available in terms of a just-in-time delivery. Just like your Amazon package, you can make an order and it will arrive in a couple of days. It's very much been the case for wheat over many years that you were able to quickly order and mobilize a shipment of wheat, really as the foundational food source of a population. So if we look at imports from Russia and imports from Ukraine, which are shown in these two maps here, we can see where the countries that are importing or most reliant on imports of cheap wheat from Russia and Ukraine. And many of these are in the global south, in the areas which we target in terms of securing food supply. So this concentration has happened relatively, well, it has existed for quite some time, and it's really important that we understand where these risks lie within our global systems in terms of how we respond to shocks. And this shows this in more detail, shows the trade flow between Ukraine and Russia as major world exporters. And it really goes into almost all parts of the world, the import dependency on Ukrainian and Russian wheat. And some of this can be compensated by increasing production or shifting sources of imports. But there's obviously a price point issue, which is hugely magnifying the risks in some very vulnerable areas. So countries such as Yemen, Sudan, highly reliant on imported wheat, and also World Food Programme sourcing programs are also highly reliant on Ukrainian and Russian wheat supplies. And we also see very clearly in this graph the global south dependency on the cereal trade, so essentially imports, and we can see this growing over time. So this graph shows in the final two panels the imports over time in Africa and Asia. So we can see actually that the cereal trade has been making a larger and larger contribution in terms of importing wheat to support food security in these regions. And this is not the case in Europe and North America, but is really magnified, and it really kind of visualizes the reliance on cheap and available imports. We also know that wheat consumption patterns are changing really rapidly. So if we look at Africa and we take the current rate of imports, which is shown in the yellow color, we can see that imports are increasing almost exponentially over time, and this is tracking changing patterns of consumption and urbanization. We also see the knock-on effect of cheap imports is declining or stable production. So in many parts of Middle Africa, West Africa, obviously it's difficult to produce wheat in the tropics, but even in East Africa, where we have very conducive conditions for wheat production, haven't seen urbanization because of this availability of imports at low cost and readily available to buy on the global market. So we really need to address these kind of growing gaps between the demand from populations and the levels of production that we see. And you can see this really markedly if you visit a mill in East Africa. So this picture on the left is from the largest miller in East Africa a few weeks ago. And currently the grist of most flour in East Africa is made predominantly from Russian and Ukrainian wheat. You can see in one of these photos 3 silos, so 2 of those are now empty, the third is 30% full. And really this is a real-time challenge in order to keep the mills operational and then to keep these large-scale bakeries, which supply much of the urban population, in this case in Nairobi, with bread supply. So these are really new challenges, very pressing and very real in terms of how you can really replace 60% of your flour grist in a very short period of time when there are no boats available to bring wheat to the ports. So at CIMMYT, we've developed with many colleagues and partners a package of applied solutions which we're proposing to address the current crisis. So these fall across different timescales, obviously, so short, medium, and longer term. And in the short term, the priorities on mitigation of the food security shocks. And here we propose boosting production in existing high and low productivity areas. And I think interesting here to consider the ability to grow wheat as part of systems, whether they're aquatic cereal systems or other crop production systems. Also to ensure access by applying demand and supply side incentives to ensure wheat is prioritized for human food and for aid procurement programs and reaches the most vulnerable communities. And also securing supply. So we're proposing, and we've now started working on the use of flour substitution, and I'll talk about this in a bit more detail. Then in the medium term, we really want to move away from this very concentrated source of supply, increase the local, regional, and global resilience of the wheat supply chain. And this involves targeted expansion, obviously many constraints to doing this, both biophysical and agroecological. Then looking at self-sufficiency pathways, how we can provide comprehensive technical support, and many CIMMYT colleagues who are on the call work in these areas. How can we deliver really comprehensive technical solutions that can scale on the ground and be implemented to ensure and enhance production. And then also monitoring capacity. So one of the important sets of data from the current crisis has been real-time capture of NDVI and production data across the world, and we really believe that having independent real-time surveillance and understanding of crop coverage and risks to crop coverage in terms of climatic risks as well as disease risks are hugely important in terms of a medium-term solution. And then in the longer term, obviously aligned very much to the 1CG ambition, as well as the ambition of many of our programs, is to transition to more resilient agri-food systems. And here we see really an important role for agro-ecosystem interventions. I think also in this context, very interesting to talk to colleagues at WorldFish about how we really diversify and make use of the available evidence to deliver ecosystem services alongside highly productive systems. We also believe really strongly, particularly in the commodity space, that addressing gender disparities which exist and can be magnified by shifts to higher value cereal production are really important in terms of both the solutions that we deliver in terms of the technical packages, as well as the training and the policy frameworks and market incentives that exist for cereal production. And then increasing investment, which is, I'm sure, something that nobody would disagree with, really focused on these longer term agri-food transitions. So these are laid out in this link here, our current preprint, which describes these in more detail. So just to touch on a few of these areas, in terms of wheat specifically, we believe there's great potential to address productivity gaps. And this is really within the CIMMYT mandate and the CIMMYT activities across genetics, plant breeding, agronomy, G by E by M, and understanding where improved varieties can have an impact, how we can target varietal turnover, and how we can match the agronomy and the packages of solutions that can be provided. So this map shows the production gaps from based on crop simulation models. And we can see that in many regions of the world, including many key wheat producing regions, South Asia, China, even in Europe and beyond, we have the potential to address some of these production gaps and increase production without increasing the footprint of our current wheat production. As I mentioned, we're also really excited about the potential to substitute a proportion of wheat flour with the flour of other typically underutilized. Sarah Kariuki, who's based in Nairobi, to replace imported wheat flour in East Africa by using locally produced crops without impacting flour quality and consumer evaluation. So here we're really looking at scale at the flour and grain component. How do we reduce the demand for wheat grain, wheat flour, and produce products which the consumer which are still favored by the consumer as a bread product would be. And so this is work that's now ongoing. We're working very closely with the milling and baking industry in East Africa to source, mill, and create products, functionally assess them, and then run a lot of consumer evaluations on street corners and supermarkets and in people's homes to understand really the potential for scaling up the use of flour blending and flour substitution to reduce demand and to reduce the price point of wheat flour as an immediate response to the crisis. So then I just wanted to talk very briefly about building more resilient production. So obviously we've identified a number of short, medium and long-term actions in terms of the crisis response, but the climate crisis is also very real and its effects are being felt and seen really in our production today and will be continued to be felt into the future. So here's a link for a recent post on the current heat or the recent heat events in South Asia and really the real-time impacts of those on wheat production. And this is from this article, and it shows the NDVI maps at the end of the cropping season in the Indo-Gangetic plains, which are responsible for producing a very large amount of the world's wheat and the wheat that is relied on for underpinning food security in South Asia. So the yellow in this graph shows deviation from the 5-year average, and this was really a late season heat stress event, which had significant impact on the yield predictions that were made and that are really used to understand how much wheat's available for export, how much is available for the populations, and how much can be stored as a food security mitigation strategy. So this had really huge effects in terms of the wheat harvest this year, and it's really a real-time impact. It also had, because our systems are all connected, it also had an impact in terms of the Ukraine-Russia response, because India announced that it would not export wheat due to this revision of the harvest figures because of this late heat stress event. So these are really effects that we see now and we expect to see into the future. And we know if we look at the projections, again shown on this map, of where we expect to see changes in rain-fed wheat yields over the time period to 2050. And we can see there's a large proportion of these are predicted to be decreasing, which are shown in the red and orange and yellow colors. And you can also note that many of the decreases occur in the global south. So these projections really highlight for us the regions where the climate impacts are forecast to be greatest. And these also inform our short, medium and long-term actions, because we can really target interventions or target strategies to breed and create adaptation and mitigation strategies where these changes will be greatest. There's also the potential to map onto this the other cereals as well as the other components of the cropping and farming systems, such as the aquatic or livestock components, which are reliant on these changes in cropping patterns. So just to highlight some of the work that's ongoing at CIMMYT, so a lot of work in the genetics and upstream discovery space to really look at what traits can be discovered and applied in breeding to adapt wheat. So this is really our adaptation strategy. How can we improve the resilience adaptation of wheat to grow in this context of climate change? And this work's led by Matthew Reynolds, who's in the CIMMYT Global Wheat Program. And then we're also implementing accelerated breeding at scale. And this really aims to incorporate new variation and push the breeding program as fast as possible to deliver products to partners around the world that carry these adaptation traits, along with all of the desired agronomic and productivity gains. So we have a significant investment in accelerated breeding infrastructure at CIMMYT, and this shows our greenhouse facility in Toluca here in Mexico, where we have now 2 hectares of semi-controlled environments where we can really push forward the early stages of our breeding program to deliver this germplasm, which is more adapted and more productive for future environments faster. And it's also important to mention integrated integration of this with crop management, which is another big part of the CIMMYT portfolio. And this data shows here from Sonora in northern Mexico, heat mitigation through the use of drip irrigation. So where water is available, we know we can use water more effectively to mitigate yield declines due to temperature increases, and also extensive work through the CISA projects over very many years with CIMMYT and a number of partners to combine new varieties with mechanization options and to really contextualize how we use new varieties and deliver them together with packages of agronomics to improve the overall management of wheat and wheat rice rotations here specifically, but also as components of other systems. And obviously there's the great potential to look at the broader systems perspective, and fish and wheat rotations really interested to look at this in more detail and how we can optimize all the individual components and then bring these together to deliver greater impact. So just to finalize some key takeaways from my presentation. So we know wheat is pivotal to the alleviation of hunger. It's eaten by 2.5 billion people as a primary source of calories and protein for many people around the world. The current crisis, which is very much at the forefront of current thinking and current coverage, catalyzed by the Ukraine-Russia conflict, has really highlighted something I guess we already knew, the risks of really having a concentrated low-cost import supply and all of the knock-on effects of that. And we're proposing a set of applied solutions which are needed to mitigate the short, medium, and long-term effects, and have started to implement some of these in terms of blending seed system development and policy interventions. So we know also that over 50% of the world's wheat is grown in the global south, and is really within the CIMMYT mandate, and projected yield declines will disproportionately impact production in these regions. And therefore building resilience is really a priority and goes all the way from understanding the upstream genetics through to understanding how we deliver that into diverse cropping systems. And we're really focused in the CIMMYT wheat program on accelerating improvement, incorporating the latest genetics, the latest evidence of traits for adaptation. And we really look to further integrate these systems components to achieve greater impact at scale. And if we revisit Matthew chapter 14, we can see that they all ate and were satisfied. And really, I think this is huge potential to achieve great scale of impact when we talk about both wheat and fish, and the ability to deliver these impacts to a large proportion of vulnerable populations. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. So we open the microphone. Yes, we have one question already here in the chat box. So let me just go back and read it for you. Midterm, what about cereal staple crop diversification, added to or even replacing wheat to improve farm and landscape level resilience? Long article in influential Swiss paper. There's a Swiss paper also citing John 6 from ETH today, proposing greater breeding investment in more nutritious local cereals like teff and sorghum. What do you?
Yeah, thanks. I think there's a couple of answers to that question. I think we're very supportive of diversification of cereal-based systems specifically. I think one of the areas that we're really interested in terms of the climate change adaptation, mitigation, adaptation response is really understanding where the tipping points are for all of our cereal crops. So we know in many parts of Africa, for example, the climate will become very unfavorable for maize production. So we really think the potential there is to understand, okay, when it becomes unfavorable for maize production, what's the next step? Okay, is it sorghum, is it millet? And then how do we start to test that and understand really how those solutions can be delivered? And then I think also in terms of the blending work, we're really interested in blending as a response to the immediate crisis, but also as a way to drive demand for other cereals. So for example, working, I think Paswal is on the call, but working with the sorghum and millet teams, how can we use blending as a way to drive demand for some of the millets or sorghum, if we can use these as components of flour blends which are used at scale. And then obviously a huge interest in crops like teff, and the challenge remains how we really achieve the same level of scale and food system impact through those minor cereals. And again, we're working at the consumer interface, which I think is a really interesting starting point to understand consumer acceptance of these products, either on their own, but also as components of blends, and working backwards from that consumer, understanding the consumer demand, understanding the government policy position, and then working backwards with the crop teams to be able to deliver them. So I think three components really is the climate adaptation, the use of blending to drive demand, as well as the starting with the consumer and understanding what is demanded and working backwards to deliver that. Thanks, Isabel.
Thank you very much. Hugh, there is in the chat box, there is a discussion, there is a discussion between some colleagues, and it says that, for example, the question was what extent and with what economic and ecological viability, and then there is a question, an answer from ML Yat. That is a question for research, but you may see a few publications, and then he's providing few publications to address this question. But here is another question. As an Eritrean, you won't have to try hard to pursue me to eat teff. Oh, well, that's a comment.
That's a good comment. Me too.
Okay, so we have do
you want me to just answer the one from, yeah, I think Emil,
yes, please.
Maybe Emil wants to ask it in person or bring some points there. Go ahead, Emil.
Thanks, Alison. I think it's a great presentation. I feel like I put a question, before what Isabel indicated, but where do we see the opportunity for extensification of the wheat with sustainability, within ecological boundaries, with economics? I think we need to, and looking at the natural resources and the climate change and the comparative profitability, where are the areas? I think you indicated in the medium-term strategy, we can go for expansion of the wheat area. But I think we need to precisely indicate where and with what resources and what kind of investments we can have the extensification of the wheat. I think, as Victor mentioned, I think we also need to diversify wheat in many of the areas.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think there's really a lot of interesting questions which lie beneath that. I think, and they're questions that we're working on and now. And one question is the biophysical potential, right? And I think it's relatively easy now to look at the biophysical potential and say, okay, you can grow wheat there. And that's what we initially did in some places, such as Rwanda. But then I think if you look at the government planning strategy, it says really the government position for the next 5 years is to focus on high value fruit and veg. Obviously, that comes with an assumption of availability of cheap imported wheat. So I think there's those layers where you say, okay, it could be grown, but it's not a stated priority or policy decision to do that for various reasons. But I think it is quite linked to the forex cost of imported wheat as well. So obviously the economic context has an impact, but that also has an impact in the short term when there's no wheat available to buy at a low price and may not sustain through to the medium or longer term. I think we've also been talking a lot about conservation and how you achieve conservation objectives with this expansion of wheat or any kind of agricultural expansion options. And the agro-diversity, I'm not sure what the name is, initiative is really looking at that and what land area do you prioritize for conservation But I think it's certainly a multi-layered question. Where can you grow wheat? Then should you grow wheat? Is it a priority of the government? Is it something that's sustainable as a long-term strategy as well as a short-term response strategy? And then how do you weight that with the conservation trajectory that you want to see on that land area? So a lot of factors, but really happy to discuss in more detail.
Yeah, just a follow-up, Alison. Don't we feel like our strategy, in the immediate term, medium term, and long term should be on the closing the yield gaps, the management yield gaps? I think if we can close the management yield gaps, we can double the wheat production rather than the extensification.
Definitely. I think that was, sorry, I tried to show that on my slide showing these. Let's see if I can go back. Yield gaps, so where wheat's produced but is below production potential. And so here everywhere, which is orange or red, you can see by mechanized sowing, by corrective application of fertilizer, by using new varieties. These are really areas. So you can see a lot of South Asia, different regions of the world. So I think that's very much our short-term, one of the short-term proposals, ML, is to really look at that. And I think great evidence from your work and the work of several others that addressing many of those gaps, many of which are agronomic and some of which are seed system related, can have a big impact without any expansion of land in a short term. I mean, for agricultural systems, short term time frame.
Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you very much for this presentation. Now I would like to invite Sarah Fried. She's already here. So please, Sarah, and go ahead with your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So hello, everyone. I'm just putting up my slides now.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. And I hope now this will move through the slides. So I will be sharing with you some lessons on designing production practices to meet diverse objectives. And these lessons are coming from some studies on rice fish innovations. So just to give some context, here are some of the current challenges faced in rice growing areas. We're looking at dealing with climate change effects, persistent rural poverty, especially in terms of debt and loss of land ownership. We're also looking at food and nutrition insecurity, increasing demand. This is for both rice and fish, but really more so for fish than rice or other staples. And so finally, as I go through the lessons, I would want you to consider, are these lessons applicable in wheat growing areas? Are they facing some of these same challenges? Or what might be some of the differences? So just to give you some background on the study that was done, it was a review of rice fish innovations. Some of this work is ongoing, but some of it was also published in 2020. And in that published study, we identified 5 design recommendations so that integrated production systems can meet diverse objectives. We had several cases we presented in the review, and today I will use 3 of those cases to share and to provide the examples on these recommendations. So what were the recommendations? First of all, to identify the range of objectives, both the ones available and desired. Secondly, to identify the range of production options when looking at integrated production. Third would be to use a co-design process when designing the production system or the innovation. And fourthly, to implement fit-for-purpose design and evaluation. And last but not least, to enable adaptation. So I'll also give you an overview of the 3 cases. these might be some new kinds of systems that I would like to introduce you to. So the first one is a rice field fishery system. In this system, wild fish are abundant in and move among the rice fields, ponds, waterways, and large water bodies. So there's high aquatic connectivity across these systems. Rice fields are still privately held and privately cultivated, but the aquatic resources are common pool resources. That means that really anyone can collect the aquatic resources on these rice fields or other habitats. And that's what makes the fishery component. So the second type of system is called community-based fish culture. In this system, there's an alternation between communal fish culture during the monsoon season and privatized rice culture during the dry season. This is possible because fingerlings are stocked during the flood season in the lowland seasonal floodplain, and there are inlets and outlets installed to control fish movement. At the same time, there are these stocked fish that are used for aquaculture. There are also small wild fish still present. So this system has both a fishery and an aquaculture component. The third type of system that we'll be sharing today is the rice shrimp culture system. And this system has developed mainly through adaptation to salinity in rice growing areas. And it's also popular because of the high value of shrimp. It can be considered a cash crop. There's some key differences for this system and the other two that I just presented. So for example, there's not much aquatic connectivity in this system. Water is much more highly controlled. And so the plots where rice shrimp are done are usually disconnected with other water bodies. There can also be more environmental impact through nutrient loads, as well as the potential to actually encourage further salinization. And I'll share more on that later. The other key difference between this type of integrated production and the other two I just mentioned are that the rice shrimp culture is privately owned and managed. There's usually not a communal component, not a fishery or a collective management of the system. Okay, so we'll get into the recommendations in more detail, and I will share some examples as well. So this first recommendation was to identify the range of objectives. And as you see from the list here, when we looked at rice fish innovations, we saw a variety of objectives were aimed at. Some had multiple objectives for one innovation. They can be sometimes similar looking objectives, but might actually be achieved quite differently. For example, food security and nutrition are highly interlinked, but the way they are achieved can be very different. So from our study, I'm just sharing some examples from 3 countries here. You'll see that for each country, there were, as on a national level, there were multiple objectives that were desired from these innovations, and also that those objectives have changed over time. So we looked at during a time period, heavily in the Green Revolution, and then looking also at more current types of objectives. So you'll see that they represent a variety of objectives, but also changing and being different over time. I also want to point out for aquatic food, there's really unique contributions that are made to objectives that are not as easily made through other types of production. And this is a good reason to consider including aquatic foods when looking at integrated production systems. So a few of these contributions are that they are providing diverse, nutritious, and affordable diets. They supply multiple essential micronutrients with high bioavailability. They also can combat hidden hunger and micronutrient deficiency. So looking at how to identify a range of objectives, one of the important questions to ask is whose objectives are we identifying? And so it's important to look across different stakeholder groups and across different scales. So I showed you some examples of national objectives from our review, but often there can be local objectives as well in the production systems, and they may slightly differ from what was the national objectives. Okay, going on to our second recommendation, to identify the range of production options. So common ways to identify options are to look at some variables like biophysical and technical variables and organizational and institutional variables. There's also the approach that we use to be called an agroecological lens to look at the different options and actually broaden which options might be available for a location. So to show how we did this, we have here the key variables we identified for rice fish production practices. You'll see biophysical variables such as the source of the fish, the level of water control, and input in rice. We did also look at organization or institutional variables, primarily how fish were accessed in the system. And then we've organized the range across these variables in an what you might call an agroecological way. So you see on the left side, the more natural or low input and more collective type range of the variable. And then as we move towards the right, they become more high input or more controlled and also more privatized. And so the benefit of doing this, then we could actually easily situate our different types of production options and identify, according to the agroecological gradient, where these production options might be most suited. So for example, you see rice field fisheries and community-based fish culture towards the more natural side. So again, especially looking at water control, these are practices that are suited to areas with less water control happening. And then where you see the rice field aquaculture, that would include the rice shrimp culture that we will be looking at. And that has to have more water control. So you see that it's situated in that kind of a different context than you might use for the rice field fishery or community-based fish culture. But you can also see here there were other options to consider as well. And it can also be a way to look at which of these variables might be modified to accommodate different options as well. So the third recommendation was using a co-design process. And what we saw was that in this process, users will participate in the design, and the approach was contextualized and inclusive. And this meant that the design would be emergent or iterative, meaning that it was not a final design at the start, or a process that took place to refine the design with the participation of the users. And this also ensured that it was really well suited to the location and to those variables we just mentioned, both biophysical, technical, as well as organizational, institutional variables. And so how to start this co-design process, there's some key questions to ask. First of all, who would need to be involved in the process, and whether all users are represented during the process. So an example of this co-design process we can see in the community-based fish culture system. They used this participatory design, and the way it worked was for technical elements. These were primarily designed by the researchers, and this was, again, initial the initial design, but then there was iteration. These elements were tested by the users and could be refined over time. Then for the institutional elements, these were primarily designed by the users themselves, but they needed support. And so this was facilitated by the researchers and NGOs and work. And when we talk about users, this again goes to that question of who is using the system and who needs to be involved. So it was not just rice farmers. It was not just landowners. The users included all landowners, landless, fishers, farmers, and laborers. So the design of this system was actually very beneficial to a variety of stakeholders. All right, the fourth recommendation was implementing fit-for-purpose design and evaluation. I'm sure many of you are aware that decision-making and planning tools do not always incorporate a variety of objectives that can be desired. And so we found that this is definitely a need when designing these systems, that we work to align better the decision-making and planning tools with the recognized objectives that want to be achieved. And part of achieving this is to adjust metrics and evaluation frameworks. So I have a couple examples of this. Again, for community-based fish culture, you see the initial types of evaluation that was done were very agronomic. So looking at rice yields, was rice yield in these integrated production sites similar to rice yields in rice monoculture sites? And also, how did income, how was the performance for income? And so those were the focus early on, but there were these other objectives that we began to study as well. So of course, income still continued to track, but we also started to look at fish consumption, and especially looking across the different stakeholder groups and seeing whether consumption was improving for stakeholders. And then again, because we're including these different groups, we wanted to see how income and household expenditures were changing for these different groups, and looking at the change in benefit to the poorest of the poor, as well as benefit sharing across groups. And so that's when we brought in this expenditure inequality study. And there's also an example from rice field fisheries. So initially, a lot of these studies look at just the contribution to fishery production, locally or nationally. But there are these other objectives that the rice field fisheries are trying to meet. So we also started looking at fish consumption and the other uses of these fish, and found that consumption is definitely the primary use and is actually really important for these rural households. All right, the fifth recommendation was to enable adaptation. And of course, it's necessary to have adaptive capacity to cope with evolving challenges and to harness opportunities. So these, of course, are climate change, water scarcity, and market fluctuations. And so we looked at how can adaptive capacity be strengthened. And what we see is that adaptive capacity is likely to be strengthened in these integrated production systems, but it's not guaranteed. And so there does need to be a specific focus on whether adaptive capacity is being enhanced. And just to illustrate this, we'll use this rice shrimp system as an example, and looking at it in relation to monocultures. So rice monoculture and shrimp monoculture. First of all, shrimp monoculture would be done in these high salinity systems. And what these studies have shown are that high salinity systems are locked in meaning there's not really another option for production other than saline tolerant production, such as shrimp monoculture. And even though this shrimp is a cash crop and can be high value, some studies have found it's actually less profitable to have this shrimp monoculture than to have an intermediate or low salinity production system that can produce diverse crops and integrated fashion. There have also been studies that show that the shrimp monoculture and shrimp farmers are less resilient to climate change, especially looking at variability, drought, and rainfall, comparing to both rice shrimp and rice monoculture farming. And for this rice shrimp culture, it is from these previous studies, it's identified as more beneficial than shrimp monoculture, but there's also needs to be careful planning and governance. For example, farmers and policymakers can be tempted to extend the shrimp season or the area of shrimp growing. And again, this is because of the high value and the economic benefit. But when these things are happening, there can be increasing soil salinity and actually encouragement of salinization, which would then push it to the high salinity system that can no longer incorporate diverse crops. So it has to be carefully governed. So just to recap these 5 recommendations for integrated production in order to achieve diverse objectives. First of all, to identify the range of objectives. Secondly, identify the range of production options. Then to use a co-design process in designing the system or innovation. Implement fit-for-purpose design and evaluation. And finally, enable adaptation. So I thank you for listening, and I'm sharing the references that I mentioned in the presentation. And I can also take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think we are already in time. Okay. So I would like to invite you, for example, for 1 minute final message to the audience. I have already shared your contact information in case someone would like to continue with the conversation. Do you have any final message?
I guess I would just say that I am looking forward to seeing what might come from this this discussion and seeing what next steps might happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now I would like to invite Ahmed Nasr-Allah for a 1 minute final message, please.
Thank you very much. The current food crisis indicated the importance of 1CG working together to help the world to overcome such situation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Alison, please.
Just to reiterate that point, I think great opportunity to work together to build these systems and to test them and to look at the question of scale. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. So on behalf of the International Missing Squid Improvement Center and on behalf of WorldFish, yes, we are very grateful for this CIMMYT-WorldFish joint seminar. I hope you enjoy these great presentations of our distinguished speakers of today, Ahmed Nasr-Allah, Sarah Fried, and Alison Bentley. So thank you very much and have a nice day, nice evening. Thank you very much and looking forward for a very nice, great collaboration and successful collaboration for agriculture for peace. And thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.